SJ. Welcome to Mvskoke Radio, your weekly source for tribal and community news, interesting guests and discussions, plus a local events calendar. SJ, Stone Go, Gary Fife, Joe Jifkedos, Mvskoke Radio, Mabu Hedja de Witchkis. Welcome back to another program of Seat of the Pants by yours truly radio. Still recovering from a bit of surgery and dealing with some anesthetics. But luckily my lovely wife Ramona is there to help me through and take care of me. So bless her heart. Just love that woman. In today's program, we've got a couple things. One of our planned interviews is want to happen in live radio. Had to cancel because of some, let's say, bureaucratic interference on the part of an employer over there. But so we'll be bringing that segment back to you later on. But today we're going to be speaking with a gentleman who is taking on an unusual task here. For those of you who are familiar with Native American history, one of the darkest episodes was the massacre of Lakotas at Wounded Knee in 1890. Members of the 7th Cavalry turned their guns and cannon on old women and children and old men who were just trying to stay warm. The event, let's call it that, killed over 300 Lakota people. And there's a weird bit of history that the Army, U.S. Army troops who did it were of the 7th Cavalry. This is George Custer's old regiment, and this incident happened, of course, after the Battle of the Greasy Grass, as Lakota know it, or the Little Bighorn, as our non-native neighbors know it, and others know it as Custer's Last Stand. Well, anyway, that's what happened. And I guess the 7th Cavalry was looking for some kind of revenge, but this is what happened. We're going to be speaking with Mr. O.J. Simmons, who is now in the process of dealing with an action regarding that incident, massacre, let's call it. 20 U.S. troopers were given the United States Congressional Medal of Honor for taking part in that massacre. And the upshot is this gentleman today, Mr. O.J. Simmons, is looking to have Congress rescind those medals. In other words, take them back, because he did not feel that act was heroic, as it was called. And even their cavalry commander at the time said it was a horrible act by the Army. Anyway, let's bring him on. Let's join Mr. O.J. Simmons. Are you there with us, sir? Okay, let's see. Mr. Simmons, are you with us, sir? Mr. Simmons, are you with us, sir? Okay, well, we got a problem there. Let's see if we can't fix that. Where are we here? Been out of practice here with my arm for a little while, and so it's kind of weird getting back into action here. Oh, darn. Well, let's keep hammering away, and hopefully things will go our way. Mm-hmm. By the way, I'd like to thank Darren DeLon and Joshua Slane for filling in on our program for the last couple of weeks. Saved my tail. Appreciate you guys. So we're just expressing our gratitude. Mr. Simmons, are you with us?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
I've lost you.
Yeah, it was my fault here. I'm coming back from a bit of sick leave, and I guess my medicinal application there has left me a little fuzzy here, and being controlling how those things are. And we'll do a show on those things later on. But Mr. Simmons, why don't you take a moment here and give us a real quick idea of who you are and where you are, and we'll tackle the issue that we've got in front of us.
Sure. First of all, how we chose on the good morning. I wish everybody health and health. My name is O.J. Stevens. I'm the co-executive director, along with my wife Barbara, of Four Directions Inc., which is a voting rights advocacy group. We are based, and I am calling from the Rosebud Sioux Indian Reservation in South Dakota.
Okay, thank you, sir. Now, we were introducing this discussion here with just a touch of the history of the massacre at Wounded Knee in 1890, but you're probably far more familiar with the facts there, so perhaps you could give us a recap of that particular incident.
Sure. Well, one of the things that's really different about this is our basic strongest advocate on what we're trying to do to remove these metals is General Miles, who was in charge of the military during this time. He was a Civil War veteran. He actually got the Medal of Honor. He was wounded during the Civil War. But he was the one that laid out the facts of what happened during Wounded Knee. And when he described it, he basically said it was the most hideous massacre that happened in United States military history. He described the women and children having gunpowder burns on their clothing and on their skin, women with babies in their arms with bullet holes through them. It was one where this was a actual Indian fighter that chased natives up into Canada and made his career out of fighting Indians. And for an individual such as him to describe this massacre as being just terrible, you can't find a better advocate for justifying the removal of those medals. Now, he also removed Forsyth as a commander after that incident, and later on, when they tried to give more medals to some of the 7th Cavalry for the Wounded Knee massacre, he said it was a stain basically upon those that have already died and served. So we consider General Miles our strongest advocate for what we're trying to do. And honestly, he can't change his mind now.
Right, not 100 years later. Now, you mentioned the 7th Cavalry here, and we also talked about it slightly during the introduction. I think it's important for people to understand who these Army troops were and speculate perhaps on why this thing happened. 7th Cavalry, Custer's troop?
Yeah. General Custer basically was in charge of the 7th Cavalry, and what his function was is to basically put the Indians under control or wipe them out. And he came across the Sioux at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and at that time the 7th Cavalry was basically wiped out. And so this was on June 25th, and about 5 years later, is when the 7th Cavalry showed up at Wounded Knee. Now, one of the things people don't realize is that prior to the massacre that morning, on the 29th, the Chief Bigfoot and his band had already surrendered to the cavalry. Now, there's two things to understand. First of all, we already had a treaty signed with the United States, so there really wasn't no war. And second of all of the people at Wounded Knee with Chief Bigfoot, they turned around and they surrendered all of their weapons and whatnot. Even Chief Bigfoot was being cared for because he had pneumonia. And so the prior to the massacre happening, they had already surrendered. They had the white flag. Everything was there. It wasn't until the next morning when Forsyth showed up that they decided to take some type of action. Now, what was really telling you that this was intentional was how they placed the Hotchkiss guns basically surrounding the encampment. I mean, they intended for this massacre to happen.
Now, hang on. Let me interrupt you. You mentioned Hotchkiss guns, and I don't want to get too technical for our listeners, but I think it would be important for them to understand what a Hotchkiss gun was and how it got used there. Now, as I understand, these weapons were new to the Army at the time, or something like that. Is that correct? And enabled the troops to fire almost rapidly.
Yeah, it was basically your first automatic weapon back in the day, and so it was brand new to the military, and basically what it was is a light mountain gun. It fired huge shells, your basic cannon.
And this was a breech loading gun?
Yes, and it didn't fire normal bullets. It fired, like little bitty rockets, basically, and had extensive damage all around it. So it wasn't just a bullet that you would see nowadays, like the on an AR-16 or anything. It was a miniature cannon.
Right. And I think it's important for people to know is that this new mechanism enabled the Army to fire quite rapidly into this mass of people and put several rounds in where in the Civil War days they had to, dump powder in and then a ball and then tamp it down and then light it and hopefully get out of the way. But this enabled them just to pop open the back door and throw a shell in, right?
Right. I mean, we're talking it was an actual cannon that was made to look like the Gatling gun, but it had 37 millimeter barrels. I mean, and it could fire 60 rounds per minute, and its accuracy was within 2,000 yards. So it was a basic cannon that was built like a Gatling gun and could fire instantly.
A quick reference point: a 37 millimeter shell was enough to stop a tank in World War II, right?
Correct.
Okay. Well, anyway, they've got these guns positioned. Were they like on a hill or a ridge surrounding the camp, looking down? How did that work out?
Yeah, they basically had the camp surrounded. They had the high ground in which they positioned the weapons, and what happened basically is when they actually started firing upon the natives, what they actually did is, because of the way that the guns were positioned, they actually started killing themselves. And so, a lot of the wounded, or those that were killed during the Wounded Knee Massacre, were killed by their fellow soldiers. So, and that's the other thing that was pointed out by General Miles is placement of how they placed the Hotchkiss gun actually did a lot of harm to the soldiers themselves.
Oh, gosh, killed by friendly fire.
Well, and we can go back to Tillman just recently during the Afghan War. I mean, how they did that one, and there was no medals issued for Tillman, and he gave up a great career to fight for this country,
Right.
and he was killed by friendly fire, but they didn't issue no medals of honor to those that were involved in that.
Right. That looks, of course, as you say, places quite a stain on the U.S. Army. Something that has happened is a matter of history that we can't change or anything like that. Let me ask you a couple of things, I guess, to speculate on motivation here. Now, these are the troops of the 7th Cavalry, and I would presume they're still mad. They still wanted revenge on the Indians for wiping out their colleagues, their comrades.
Yeah, well, basically that's what Wounded Knee was. I mean, it was to get revenge on an actual battle that happened at the Little Bighorn. There's no doubt in any Native mind. Even I think you're going to have a hard time with historians finding that there was an actual reason for such a massacre. The University of Nebraska actually did a history paper on that basically came to the conclusion that this was a revenge killing.
My gosh. Now, I've seen in my readings on this particular incident that some people were saying that some Indian warrior still would refuse to give up his rifle, and then during the altercation there, the gun went off, and people just decided, okay, well, they're shooting at us, so let them have it. Are you familiar with that at all?
Oh, I've heard it. From listening to relatives and friends and stuff. A lot of the people that were descendants from there disagree with that. And the other thing you have to remember, even if it did happen, these were not weapons of rapid fire. If anything, it was one where you fired a shot, and it was almost like a musket. So having one shot ring out in the middle of surrounding a encampment of people, and you have professional soldiers there, that is not a cause to open up on everybody. So even if there was some truth in that, it isn't justifiable for the type of massacre of the women and children that happened that day.
Yeah, we've all seen, well, I would presume many of us have seen photographs of the aftermath of that battle, and the one that sticks in my mind is a photo of Chief Bigfoot lying on the ground in a twisted position, his body frozen, and then there were bodies behind them, and I think a couple of soldiers standing there. Is that still a pretty accurate portrayal? I mean, did somebody mess with that, or is that actually the photo?
That is actually the photo, and you have to remember it's wintertime too. So a lot of the bodies that they photographed that day were actually frozen in place. So even if an individual did not die immediately after receiving gunshot wounds from the soldiers, they perished. Through that evening because of the weather itself, in which they actually. The freezing to death came along with it. Right.
This is hard, I think, for all Indians around the nation. I mean, most of us, of course, are not Lakotas, but I think we share in the grief and the tragedy of what happened, and I think in many cases probably some of the anger. Now, with that being said, in today's time and place, let me ask you what your motivation was then in taking the action to have, what was about 20 medals of honor rescinded. You were going to go to Congress and ask them to do it. What made you do it?
Well, there has been action for years, if not 100+ years, in order to try to remove these medals because of the dishonor that was presented that day. And tribes have, throughout the course of history, have passed resolutions and have asked Congress to do it. Back in 1990 was the closest we came when both the House and the Senate did a resolution that actually agreed that Wounded Knee was not a battle, that it was a massacre, and that they needed to accept this so that we could move on and as a nation. But that was the closest it came. Things have changed since 1990, and Native Americans throughout the United States have increased their participation in the political process, in which we are getting natives more in the state legislatures. Oklahoma has natives in the House and in the Senate, but we're getting more natives in local state legislatures. We're getting them on school boards. We're getting them on county commissioners. We're getting them on to be in offices that control the elections. So their voice is getting louder, and they're being heard. And one of the things that is key to that is the fact that when they get into office, they're not trying to do anything radical. What they're doing is being fair, honest, and actually delivering for all of the citizens of the United States, but with a message of being who they are. And because of that, our voice is being heard more and more in the halls of Congress. And because of that, we have been able to actually work with representatives on the House side, in which we were able to introduce legislation to remove these medals. Now, just to answer or respond to one of your questions earlier, yes, we have anger for the atrocities that happened to the natives throughout the United States. But what we are talking about here when it comes to the Medal of Honor, it's a Congressional Medal of Honor. That means that medal is a part of all of us, not that is given to those soldiers. And we have soldiers that have acted in valor, that have saved lives, that have done things that actually deserve this medal. And they should not have to stand or have their medal or their bio next to those that actually did nothing but kill women and children. So this is not a Native issue. This is not a South Dakota issue. This is an America issue, in which we think that if people use common sense and they take and look at what our actual heroes look like, would agree with us that those medals should be removed.
I think that brings us to this question, which I think probably will make the fur on many people's back of their neck stand up. And this is no aspersion to the U.S. Army. We've had so many Native American veterans fight as part of that armed forces. And in so many cases, it has a wonderful history. But this particular incident, reverses all of that. And when we say that the Army is guilty of something like this, then we know that's going to anger many people. I'm sure there are people, listeners right now, are starting to get upset, and that's not what we're after. We're trying to get a clear understanding of what happened here and why. So have you run into opposition for your idea? I mean, from Army veterans and people saying, you're doing a harmful thing to those soldiers?
No. I'm actually really surprised. I've seen negative comments, on different responses to articles, but not from veterans. I haven't, had a veteran call or email me and say, where are you coming from? Matter of fact, just recently, as of yesterday, the mayor of Rapid City did a op-ed in which he asked the South Dakota professional leaders to help us remove those medals and to support the Remove the Stain Act that was passed in the House. So we are getting positive feedback on this, and we're trying to right a wrong. And one of the things that I've been asked a few times as well, that was then, this is now, get over it. And my response is, it's hard to get over it when you look at what's happening even today with the missing and murdered Indigenous women. What has happened with those medals being issued by the United States government or the military, in which there was gunpowder burns on their clothing and on their flesh and again, women and children, and then giving them medals, has carried on to this day, whether subconsciously or not, stating that it's okay to do that. It is okay to murder women and children. And if you can't grasp that, just look at the legislation that we're pushing now to take and identify and start a database to identify how many missing and murdered women that we actually have. And so this isn't a 1890 deal where you need to get over it. This is 2019, where their actions back then are still affecting us to this day.
My generation has, I don't know if you'd call it a similar event, but something that sounds eerily familiar is the case of what happened in Vietnam at My Lai with Lieutenant Calley, and the stories of whole villages and things being leveled and all the residents being killed. I luckily was not called to go into that, and I thank the Lord for giving me that blessing. But so many of our other people have been part of that, and luckily they survived, and we honor those who didn't. But it did happen, and there was a legal case about it. The soldiers were tried and things like that. Is this comparable, do you think, between 1890 and the 60s, 70s, whatever?
Sure. And again, the reason I think it's comparable is because the actions that were taken, during the Vietnam War were those that said, we are not these kind of people. We, regardless, even in war, we have a moral value that we stand by. We do not kill innocent women and children. And had we given medals for My Lai, I think you would have seen an outcry of injustice in marches in the street like you never had seen before. And what we're looking at here with the Wounded Knee Massacre is the same thing. We want to make sure that those medals that are actually issued are medals that deserve to be issued. I'm a veteran. I'll tell you, we probably lost Native Americans in every major battle the United States has been into. Recently, we just had a soldier that was killed during World War II 2 years ago. His body was returned home, Ayat. And so we have constantly fought alongside American troops throughout every war that the United States has been in. World War I, World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam War. We have had our soldiers that have committed the ultimate sacrifice with their lives for this country.
Well, while you're talking about that, let me add this. If we think about everything in more of an overview, we've had warriors fighting in every battle the U.S. has ever had, including the one to set up this country and the one that would have divided it, and everything in between. We've had warriors lost in all of those.
Well, I keep reminding people, it's still our country. They're just renting it.
Yeah. Who says it's over?
Well,
yeah.
Yep. And that's one of the reasons why we chose June 25th as the day to introduce the legislation, because June 25th was the actual anniversary of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. So we were able to get, two messages out. The Battle of the Little Bighorn was an actual battle confronting with warriors against warriors, and the Wounded Knee Massacre was not a battle. It was the killing of women and children. So that was one of the main reasons we really pushed to have it on June 25th, the anniversary of the Little Bighorn. One other thing, when we're talking about heroes and whatnot, we had a lady by the name of Marcella LeBeau. She was 99 years old. She serves on the Heartbreak at Wounded Knee organization, in which she is the secretary. But she was a World War II veteran. She was at Normandy. She was at the Battle of the Bulge. She was there on D-Day, and she was an Army nurse. And she went and was a hero for just as much of a good cause as saving lives. She was saving the lives of our American brothers and sisters at arms during World War II. And she is speaking out strongly that these medals are tarnished to our history of soldiers of valor. So we have great support on making this happen. Matter of fact, the relative that helped with the Hotchkiss guns is in support of removing these medals, and a relative of Forsyth has been working with the tribes to do the same thing. So we have support not only from natives, but from some relatives of the soldiers at Wounded Knee, and we are moving forward, and we're moving forward with a good heart. Right. We're not taking and trying to do anything evil or wicked to descendants and survivors. We're trying to take and right a wrong that history has done.
Let's bring this discussion up to the present day now. You have mentioned June the 25th a couple of times. You actually went to Capitol Hill with a proposal like this, looking for support. Fill us in on what's happening there.
Yeah, well, we were working with Congressman Heck out of Washington State on this. And as I said before, we didn't want to make this a native issue because it's really, if you think about it, it's not. The massacre was all native, but we're talking about a medal here. So we were very glad that Senator Heck reached out to us after he saw letters. Let me back up a little bit. We sent letters to the President Trump and the administration, to the Secretary of Defense, asking that they remove these medals. Now, under the law, the President of the United States can do this in a heartbeat, but we never received a response back. So then we made an appointment, and we went and met with the Armed Service Committee, the U.S. Senate Armed Service Committee professional staff. Now, the professional staff basically means that regardless of what election happens, they're going to be there. They're going to be the ones that are looking at the bills that go through and whatnot, and they're there at all times. So we met with both parties, and we got a little bit of history on the congressional medals. We were informed that it was under the president has a full authority, but Congress also has authority, in which they have opened up the window of opportunity to include medals of honor. They've opened up opportunities to reinstate people that lost their Medal of Honor and reinstate them. Actually, one of them, some of the medals that were rescinded, one of them was, who's the guy that was the traveling show? I can't, for some reason, his name slips me. It was Wild Bill Cody, or no?
Wild Bill, was it Hickok?
No.
Buffalo Bill.
Buffalo Bill, there you go. Well, he never got a Medal of Honor because he was a scout, and back then they didn't allow it. So what they did is they opened it up, and they made it so that even scouts could get medals. And so years and years later, he got one. 100 years later, after he passed away, Teddy Roosevelt got one. So we know Congress has the authority, and so that's when we started looking at working on actual legislation. We then, Deb Holland, who is a native and a representative out in New Mexico, agreed to co-sign the bill. And what I really appreciate about that is she also understood that this was an American issue, not a Native issue. And so she stepped back and let Congressman Heck do the actual sponsoring, and she co-signed. What was really surprising, 3 days before we were going to have the legislation introduced, Gary Cook, who is a Republican representative out of California, career Marine, got 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Medal for the Vietnam War, came on as an original co-sponsor of the bill. And he spoke on the day that we did a press release on the introduction. And what was really heartening, that it was powerful when he was up there speaking as a historian, as a career soldier, as a Marine, and as a white guy, saying this was wrong. And so we are gaining momentum. As I said before, the mayor of Rapid City has now chimed in, basically saying, yeah, we need to correct a historical wrong. So we are now talking to individuals in the Senate to look at a companion bill, and what we're looking at is using the National Defense Authorization Act as the vehicle in which we will move the legislation through, because that's a must-pass bill. It's got to go every year. And so we're looking at using that as a vehicle to move the legislation through to remove those medals.
Mr. Siemens, I'm going to ask you a favor right now. We had originally thought about cutting off our discussion right about now, but I really see no point in doing that. And the piece that I had lined up can wait for another program. So if you don't mind, we will continue our discussion. Would that work for you?
Yeah, it's an honor just to be able to talk to you and the good citizens of Oklahoma to explain this. So yeah, that's not a problem.
All right. Well, let's talk about reactions now. Of course, what came to my mind is, Army veterans who might be offended by this kind of thing. Have you heard anything from regular U.S. citizens? I know where you're at right now is not exactly a very cordial place in relationships between Native people and non-Native community. Has that community spoken up and said anything? Are you getting weird stuff on your telephone or an email or stuff like that?
I'm actually glad you brought that up, because we've had nothing but positive response. Even our local newspapers, and being an advocate for equality and voting rights, we had to sue the state of South Dakota twice in order to get equality. And so we've had our legal battles with the state of South Dakota. But even the local papers, the papers that you would think would be the first ones to say, there goes those uppity Indians, they have been supportive. We have been getting coverage in our local press and even our local television station, putting in a positive report moving forward. I mean, because every a news clip can be one way or the other, depending on how they want to present it. We've had nothing but positive press coverage. I mean, even our local station had their D.C. office present during the introduction of legislation. More and more local newspapers are coming out supporting our efforts. So it's been nothing but positive. And I'm no fool. There's going to be somebody coming from somewhere.
Yeah.
And we'll deal with that when that happens. And again, everybody, I'm a veteran. You're a veteran. We fought for the right.
I can't claim that honor, and I do not. So, a veteran of Indian journalism, let's call it that. But no, I didn't.
There you go.
Yeah.
But we fought for people to have a right to have an opinion. And so if it starts coming in where I get all of these crazy calls, then I'll deal with it. But I know that they're able to do that because it's what I've done too as serving this country. So we're willing, but we're moving forward in a positive manner with a good heart. And in the end result is we are going to honor those soldiers that are actual did something for value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now I just mentioned Indian journalism. Has the Native American press picked up on this issue and followed it closely? Is it something that's important that you're seeing in the Native press?
Oh yes. Every Native paper that I've seen so far has covered this. Indians.com actually has been great of making sure that this gets out because, and again, I don't want to sound like I said this and said that. This is a Native issue, but this is also an issue of importance or this is an American issue, but this is also an issue of importance for Natives. Because what we're doing right here is very historic in trying to right a wrong. And by being able to accomplish this in the end is going to be something that every Native should be proud of, because this is the first step of a lot of atrocities that happen to us that we can show that we have taken positive action to correct and to build up the even our young kids, to give them hope that we have a future and we can change to make things better. So we have a lot of good coverage from media.
I'm glad to hear my colleagues are doing their job. You just brought up a point there about Native youth. Do they know what you're talking about? Are they familiar with this? Are they following, and do they understand?
It's surprising. At the beginning, a lot of them didn't really. Let's put it this way: in Sioux Country, everybody knows about the Wounded Knee Massacre, but not all of them know about the actual circumstances surrounding the massacre. And what is happening now is that they are looking not at the school books, but at history reports. Like I said, even the one from Lincoln, Nebraska, and reading the accounts of what actually happened there. So they are learning more and more as we progress this. So there's some real positive things happening about this movement, in which we are giving actually hope for our younger generation and a roadmap for them to be able to continue doing this sort of things in other areas. So, as I said, a lot of positive things. One of the other things that we have going on, we have started. We have scheduled on August 19th and August 20th in Sioux City, Iowa, a presidential forum that is going to address just Native issues, and that one of the questions is going to be about the Wounded Knee Medal. we have tribal leaders from the 7 key battle states that are going to be there to ask candidates questions, and we put out the invitation to all the political parties in order for them to come here. But again, this moment, this action, this movement would not have happened if our people throughout the United States hadn't started getting more politically involved, hadn't started giving all Native Americans a voice. So it's a snowball getting bigger and bigger, and it's going to lead to a lot more things, I think, for our people.
One thing I can claim as a veteran of the Indian activism, I started as a college kid back in the 60s, into the 60s, and became a career, and I'm proud to be part of it. And so many things I've seen change for Native American people doing things for themselves have occurred in my lifetime, including something like this, which would have never been thought of, never been brought out into the open in 10, 15 years ago. Would you agree with that?
Oh, I totally agree. What is happening now with the Wounded Knee Massacre movement is only because of the voices of Native Americans throughout the United States being heard. We would not be this far if it was not for all of our people making sure voices were heard. So, we're moving forward, but really we're moving forward on the backs of every Native in the United States that has fought for the right to have equality at the ballot box. So this is for all of us.
Right. Now let's talk about the package that you took to Capitol Hill, so people can understand, what the realities are now. Did you have a piece of legislation drafted? Did you take a bill into a congressman's office, and what did that bill say?
What happened when we first started talking to him about this? It was a back and forth conversation. Congressman Heck's legislative assistant, I have to give a lot of credit to for him not really knowing what Wounded Knee was, to being able to look at the documents that we sent him, and going through that and picking out the key points, and then going through and identifying the history of the medals, and how many were issued at what time, and so. But we went back and forth on the legislation itself to make sure it was proper. It identifies the actual Medal of Honor winners, or I don't know why we call getting a Medal of Honor a winner. It's like we're in a lottery or something when we're at war. It's an award. So I apologize for that. But even during this last, 15 years, during Iraq, Afghanistan, the war on terror, only 16 medals have been given out. Instead of the thousands that were issued during the Indian Wars. And so I know they said the criteria has changed, but even when the criteria changes on these medals, it means that we as a country are recognizing our moral standards and our moral values, and those should reflect back so that the current Medal of Honor winners are truly honored for their value.
What is the current status now that you've gone to Capitol Hill, an expensive proposition in itself? You've made your case to the people you thought were appropriately ones to speak with. Where does it sit now, and have you heard of any planned action on this legislation?
We are getting more and more co-sponsors on a bill. I think we're up to 7 or 8 now. It's not bad. Uh, we also realized that right after this, we had all the holidays, so Congress was out here and there. We are in active conversations with members of the Senate that are on the Armed Services Committee. And one thing I should back up a little bit when we talk about this legislation. It actually has a bill number, and I don't have it in front of me right now. But any member of Congress can introduce any type of legislation. But in order for that legislation to have a chance, that it has to be introduced by a congressman within that committee. And so with Deb Haaland co-sponsoring, she's on the Armed Services Committee as a Democrat, and with Representative Cook as a co-sponsor, he, as a Republican, is on the Armed Services Committee. So we have support on the House side, on both the Democratic side and the Republican side. And so now, in order to get this moving forward, we have active conversations now with the Senate side. And what we're doing is the same thing we did before, is we're sending them documents, history documents, factual documents, to show where we're coming from. So it's taken a little while longer to move it through the Senate, only because we're going through an educational period right now where we're sending them a ton of documents. They're reading through them and calling us back, and we're having conversations. But we're looking for that companion bill on the Senate side now.
All right. As you look at a Congress that is divided and becoming more so every day, what do you think the chances are? I know this is speculation again, but as you see it, what do you think the chances are?
I'm very optimistic. I think, being optimistic, I'm also a realist. It may not happen this year, but we realized that when we decided to do this, we decided we were going to do this like a campaign, and the campaign don't happen overnight. It would be great if we were able to get some support on the Senate side to move this through, to get it included into the NDAA this year. But if not, we're going to keep right at it into next year. So my final thought about this is it's going to get done. It may not get done in the time frame that I want it to happen, but it is going to get done. One of the challenges I put out to Congress is, I mentioned Marcella LeBeau earlier, and she is 99, and she is going to be turning 100 this fall. And my challenge to Congress was to pass this bill before her 100th birthday. I mean, she's been working over half her lifetime on doing this, and she is a war hero. If anybody should, be honored, Congress should look at this as a way of honoring her service throughout all those years during World War II and move this bill forward. So,
right, yeah, there should be about 20 medals of honor given to her. Have you heard from the national Native organizations or the major tribes around the country and their thoughts about this bill?
Yeah, the National Congress of American Indians are totally behind us. Actually, even the Native American Rights Fund, which is the oldest, law firm, I would say, but nonprofit Indian working in Indian law, is behind this. We have the Great Plains Tribal Chairmen's Association, another one called the Coalition of Large Tribes, which consists of tribes over 100,000 acres. We have support throughout Indian country. I mean, we may not be getting letters from them, but I haven't received one negative comment from any tribe, except for even during conversations at different meetings where we don't have their support. So I think this movement is uniting tribes, and it gives us something all in common.
The opportunity to express support for a measure like this is something I think Native America should be involved with, perhaps putting their support behind it. If someone wanted to express that support, where should they go? Should they send something to you, or should they send it to a particular congressperson on Capitol Hill? And what would those contacts be?
Well, first of all, I'd be flattered if people would reach out and let me know their thoughts on this. But that, in the long run, isn't going to help the movement. What I would like them to do is to contact their congressional delegation and ask them to support the Remove the Stain Act. And again, this is being done with a good heart, and it's being done in honor of our veterans. So that would be the best way to be able to help us. And actually, I would like to see everybody from across the Indian country in the United States reach out to their congressional people, but I would also like to see the good citizens of Oklahoma reach out to their congressional people and ask for this support.
Right.
Representative Mullins has always, been a friend to us, and I'm hoping he'll get on. And we Oklahoma has some Native senators that I hope that would look at this and get on board and help us move this forward.
All right. Mr. Siemens, one final thought. If you had to wrap up your ideas and your feelings here in a phrase, what would that be, sir?
Could you say it again, please?
If you were going to wrap up everything here in one phrase or a word, perhaps, what would it be?
Madakyaki. We're all related.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. O.J. Siemens, thank you so much for spending this hour with me. We appreciate you making time and wish you well. Washte, Leela Washte.
Leela Washte. You have a great day.
I certainly will after this. Thank you, sir. Mr. O.J. Siemens with discussing his proposal to rescind the 20 Medals of Honor that were given to the 7th Cavalry after the massacre at Wounded Knee. We've got a couple minutes left, and so I'm going to run through a couple of real quick local announcements, and we're going to get out of here. First of all, Eufaula Dormitory Alumni Reunion is coming up. If you want to find out more about that, you want to get a hold of the folks there. That's scheduled for Saturday, September 28th from 12 to 5 at the Eufaula Dormitory. That's the same weekend as their high school class reunion, then football homecoming. Okay, get a hold of them at, let's see here, pick out a name and a number, 508-319-1386. Okay, Mvskoke Youth Cultural Arts Mentorship. 10 Muskogee-aged youths, ages 14 to 24, will be mentored by Muskogee artists. You can learn about art, music, language, poetry, basket making, traditional weapons, can making, sewing, pottery, and much more. You have to apply by August the 2nd. You want to get a hold of the Muskogee Nation Youth Services, 918-549-2557. And, of course, the 2019 TOPE Conference is also coming up in August, 21st through the 22nd at the River Spirit Casino, talking about survivors of suicide and many of the related topics there. So you want to get a hold of those folks at Behavioral Health, 918-758-1930. Okay, time for me to get on out of here. I want to say, Mado, thank you so much for your patience today and my fumbling through some buttons. We're going to try and get back to you again next week, and maybe it won't be by remote control then. So, Mado, Mabo Hedge, it's good. been listening to Mvskoke Radio. Join us again next week for more local, tribal, and community news and updates. Madot.